World of Warcraft, Beyond the Dark Portal, by Aaron Rosenberg and Christy Golden. Chapter 19.
They are gaining on us.
Nazul glanced over at Kilrog.
Then we move faster.
The Bleeding Hollow chieftain growled and shook his head.
We already are moving as fast as we can without killing our mounts and ourselves, he pointed out bitterly. Any faster and my warriors will drop dead before the Alliance even reaches us. And who will protect you then?
They'd been marching for almost a week now, and the first few days had been uneventful. They had reached Trigador Forest without any problem, and had stepped under those tall, twisted trees with a hint of relief. The forest was as dark and gloomy as ever, the dark, clumped foliages of its trees high enough overhead that little sunlight could pierce their cover, the ground covered in fine dark moss and short shrub over the otherwise bare. But after days of walking under the hot sun, it was pleasant to find shade, and the forest seemed cool and peaceful. Until one of Kilrog's warriors, who had strayed far back from the rest of the scout behind them, had come running to find them where they camped for the night.
The Alliance!
The warrior had gasped, panting and sweating from his run.
They're right behind us! They must have taken Hellfire Citadel faster than we expected,
Gorfin had said.
Damn God. He was supposed to hold them.
Kilrog had remained calm as always.
How many are there?
The scout shaking his head.
I could not get a clear count of them, but many! More than we have here for certain, and they're moving at a frenzied pace. They push themselves to the limits.
Kilrog had mused, utterly stroking the scar below his missing eye.
Hate lends one speed. How long before they reach us?
Gorfin had asked.
They're perhaps 2 days behind us, the scout had answered. But their leader drives them like a madman, and they are closing the distance rapidly. Rules the camp, Kilrog had decided. Everyone up. We'll march through the night and put more distance between them and us. Move!
Within minutes, they had been on the move again. Since then, they had taken only short breaks, stopping beside one of Trigador's many glittering streams and rivers of water, and to catch the breath. But still, the Alliance came on, and the gap was lessening. And now they faced an awful choice.
We can stand and fight,
Gorfin suggested, but Kilrog was already shaking his head.
They outnumber us, the one-eyed orc pointed out. By a significant margin, he scowled. I hate to say it, but if we face them, they'll slaughter us, and while I gladly die for the Horde, as will my clan, dying here will not get you to the Black Temple. And we cannot outrun them,
Gorfin offered.
I do not think that with their prey in sight, they will fall behind. We can take shelter in,
Nazul began, but Kilrog cut him off quickly.
That was still a days away,
he interrupted hastily. Surely
we do not need to consider that just yet.
Sweat beaded across his brow, and Nazul was both surprised and amused to realize that Kilrog Deadeye, a legendary figure known for his courage and sheer guts, was afraid. This was not the time to be squeamish, however.
It is our only option,
he pointed out, his tone sharp enough to prevent Kilrog from breaking again.
They are still gaining on us, and if we cannot run and we cannot fight, we must hide. And the only place in this forest we can effectively do so is...
This time the interruption came not from one of the 2 lieutenants before him, but from above. Nazul felt a change in the air and a crackle of the possible storm, but unusually intense and concentrated in a tight line that bore down upon them. On instinct, he drove for the ground. A heartbeat later, something hurled through space where his head had been, trailing lightning behind it. He caught a glimpse of a dark blur that soared back up into the air and flew between the trees. and landed softly in the hand of a stout figure riding a winged beast that was bearing down upon them.
Griffins! Kilrog shouted, raising his axe above his head. Take cover!
Chaos erupted. Orcs ducked behind tree trunks and slid into nearby river or hugged its banks. Everyone was stumbling and running and falling, scrabbling up the darkness to avoid the dimly seen figures up above. A second lightning bolt streaked through the trees and seared Nerzul's sight, leaving nothing but a blinding white for an instant and flashing after images when they had faded. Then a thunderclap shook the forest, rattling the trees and throwing many orc warriors off their feet. Clearly one of the Wildhammer's attacks had been successful. The Wildhammers flew down upon their griffins, hurling their stormhammers left and right. Some attacks missed their targets, but those accursed hammers merely rose and returned to their owners, who loosened them again, like vengeful spirits. Lightning split the air again, and the thunder was an almost constant roar when they were not throwing their hammers. They were swooping in so close that griffins themselves could attack the orcs, slashing throats with a claw the size of an orc hand, pecking out eyes and fracturing skulls with a single jab of a deadly beak. Between flashes, Nerzul saw that some of the orcs had clustered together, assuming safety in numbers, but in reality only providing an easier targets. He watched a hammer blow scatter a dozen orcs at once. After the thunder and lightning, only one of them even stirred, and that feebly.
They are slaughtering us,
hissed Gorfine, who was crouched beside him.
Do something.
The Death Knight glared at him, and a slow, calculating grin spread across his rotting face.
This is but a handful of short human pretenders and overgrown birds. I thought the mighty Nerzul would be able to handle such a pathetic attack. But no matter. I can if you are unable.
He started to rise. The impudence! Nerzul's mind shot back to the conversation with Gul'dan's skull.
He should not speak to you. No, he should not. You should not speak to me, Karen Gorfine,
he said, his voice icy. Gorfine blinked, surprised at his tone.
Nor will I permit it from you again.
Nerzul rose, fueled by his anger. He clenched his fists and concentrated on the earth beneath them and the air around them. Shamanic magic had once made him one with this world, able to tap the elements themselves, but the elements no longer heeded his call. They had not since they had sworn allegiance to kill Jaden, as if the elements were disgusted by the demonic energy that now tainted all his race. But no matter. He had learned new skills since. Whereas before the forest had been still, save for the cries of attacks and wails of the dying, now a wind erupted out of nowhere. A griffin that had a moment before been diving smoothly for another pass, beak open in an angry shriek, claws extended, now clawed frantically as it was buffeted about as if by an unseen hand. Its rider struggled to maintain his seat, but failed and fell heavily toward the ground. The unburdened griffin sought the skies. Nerzul gestured with both hands commandingly, and the wind snatched up dry gray sand and proceeded to scour both dwarf and griffin within it. The Wildhammer cried out, not in victory but in agony, as his skin was scoured from his bones. It was a sweet sound to Nerzul's ears. Its mount was no luckier. Feathers flew and droplets of blood were caught up in the whirlwind. Seconds later there was nothing but 2 piles of glistening flesh on the forest floor. But Nerzul was nowhere near done. A wave of his left hand and rocks the size of his head dislodged themselves from the earth and shot upwards as if hurled by the very ground rippling beneath them. Nerzul turned his attention to the rest of the Wildhammers. More rocks erupted from the ground, propelling into the sky, and the griffins and their riders tried to dodge the sudden animated stones. The attacks against the orcs ended as the Wildhammers found themselves forced to concentrate on evading the new menace. Nerzul turned to Gorfine, a slight superior smile on his lips. The Death Knight looked surprised, but recovered quickly.
Well done,
Gorfine said.
Now see if I can add to the confusion.
Studying the forms darting about overhead, the Death Knight stood still a moment, eyes narrowed.
There,
He said, at last gesturing toward one of the dwarves in particular.
I've seen that one before, during the Second War. He is their leader.
Gorfin stood up and raised his hands high. They began to glow with a pulsating green light, and then the energy shot upwards, striking both griffin and rider. The griffin squawked in obvious pain and plummeted, its wings furled tightly around it. At the same time, the rider convulsed as well and toppled out of his saddle. The griffin managed to shake off its injuries and spread its wing just in time, turning a dead fall into a choppy glide, and then beating hard to rise back up above the lower branches into the shadows. Its rider was not so fortunate. The dwarf slammed into the ground and lay unmoving. Gorfin was already sprinting towards the body, as was Kilrog, and Ner'zhul joined them. It was the first dwarf Ner'zhul had ever seen up close, and he studied the strange little figure intently, taking in the stout muscular build and craggy features, the long braided beard and hair, and the tattoos that covered most of the dwarf's flesh. The wild hammer was bleeding from several gashes, but his chest still rose and fell regularly.
Excellent,
Kilrog commanded, pulling a leather strip from his belt patch and tying the dwarf's hands together behind his back, then doing the same to his feet.
Now we have a captive.
He lifted the bound dwarf to his feet and bellowed,
Begone, winged pests, or we will slaughter and devour your leader while you watch.
The Wildhammers apparently decided they had enough. The griffins cawed and clanked their beaks, and then wheeled and flew up beyond the trees, disappearing from view. Only Kilrog's captive remained behind, but that couldn't last.
We need to assess our losses,
Kilrog pointed out after the Wildhammers had gone,
and we should post scouts to check on the rest of the Alliance army.
Ner'zhul nodded.
Take care of it,
he said absently. He would die before admitting it, but he found himself surprised by his own power. It had come so easily, and was so strong, and produced such impressive results. It felt good.
We lost a full quarter of our forces,
Kilrog reported sometime later, stepping back beside Ner'zhul where the shaman waited against one of the larger trees.
Those dwarves know how to attack quickly and effectively, and they use the trees to good advantage.
Ner'zhul could hear the grudging respect in the aging chieftain's tone. Kilrog was too good a strategist not to appreciate some sound tactics, even if they were from the other side. Then Gorfin joined them.
The rest of their army is still racing toward us,
he confirmed.
Clearly, they sent the dwarves ahead to wound us and slow us down.
The Death Knight bared his teeth at their captive, who lay on the ground near Ner'zhul's feet. He had grown several times, but had not yet regained consciousness.
How far behind us are they?
Ner'zhul demanded.
Still a day, perhaps two, and in our current state, we cannot stand against them.
Ner'zhul nodded.
Then only one course of action remains, he stated. We must go to Arkadoon.
Kilrog started, his eyes bulging, though he must have known this was coming.
No!
He shuddered.
We cannot! Not there! Don't be such a whelp!
Gorfin sneered at him.
We are out of options. That is the only way we can hope to survive the Alliance army and reach the Black Temple.
But the one-eyed orc shook his head hard.
There must be another way.
He grabbed Ner'zhul's arm, the one with one hand, and Kilrog's with the other.
There must be. We cannot go to there. It will be the end of us all. It will not,
Ner'zhul replied coldly, pulling his arms free and staring at the orc.
Arkadoon is an unpleasant ruin and a reminder of the ugly time in our past. Nothing more.
It was more, of course. Much more. Arkadoon had been well over 100 summers old when Nerzul himself had been only a baby and had belonged to the Draenei, as then, as always, hidden away deep within Tricador Forest. The old shaman had told them that it was a sacred place where the Draenei buried their dead and then returned to commune with their spirits, just as orc shamans continued to with their own ancestors as youths. Nerzul and his clanmates had crept through the forest to study the strange place, staring at its towering, chiseled stone dome. They had challenged each other to enter, to race through the tall doorway carved into the arching stone block that marked the dome front, touch something within, and then return. None of them had dared attempt it. Nerzul had gone further than most, creeping up to the entryway and running his hands along the rough stone that formed the massive doorways, but he could not bring himself to go further. According to his clan shaman, no one ever had.
The Draenei dead protect their own,
he had said. Then the war had come. The Orcs had banded together, setting aside their clan rivalries. As a single mass, they had attacked the peaceful Draenei and slaughtered them. Nerzul tried not to remember the part he had played in that destruction, or the fiery creature whom had given the order to destroy those quiet, unthreatening neighbors. And when Nerzul had refused to subject his people to such an outsider's control, when he had resisted that stranger's grandiose plans, he had been replaced. His own apprentice, Gul'dan, had willingly given himself to the stranger, binding himself to the creature's will and gaining immense power in return. Gul'dan had fed the horde's bloodlust, transformed the orcs into savages they were today. Then they had crushed the Draenei and their entire culture. Only a few had escaped, and those had fled into Arkadoon, hoping the orcs would not pursue them there. They had been mistaken. Gul'dan's lust for power knew no limits, and his new master had promised him untold might if he wiped the Draenei from the face of the world. So, Gul'dan had sent agents, a group of warlocks from his Shadow Council, which controlled the Horde warchief Blackhand from behind the scenes. They had marched into Arkadoon confident in their victory and already imagining the power they would wield from the artifacts rumored to be buried there. But something had gone wrong. They had found an artifact, to be sure, only to discover that it contained a strange entity. A being they had freed, though whether deliberately or through careless arrogance, no one could be sure now. Because the creature's excellent escape had shattered Arkadoon itself, the great stone dome crumbled, a massive temple within it torn to pieces, and the countless underground tunnels that housed the Draenei dead exploding outward onto countless fragments. The impact had destroyed the forest for over a league in every direction, and littered the now barren ground with bones from the Draenei who had once lain at rest with Arkadoon's catacombs. Only a few of the Shadow Council members had survived and escaped, fleeing back to Gul'dan to report to the grave city gone, but any Draenei within assuredly killed as well. No one had ever returned there, and to this day, orcs avoided the bone wastes, as the area around Arkadoon had been named. Until now.
We have no choice,
Nerzul reiterated, fixing first Kilrog and then Gorfing with his gaze.
We must go there. Some of the tunnels must survive, at least for a short length, and within them we may be able to defend ourselves. Without such protection, the Alliance forces will kill us all, and our race will die with us.
Kilrog sputtered something unintelligible. Gorfing stared at him contemplatively, red eyes narrowing.
Fool is right. We've no other choice. But we must proceed with caution. I have no wish to waken something we cannot defeat. It is settled then,
Nerzul said.
Is it not, Kilrog? I should hate to leave you behind.
The old chieftain swallowed hard and lowered his head. Nerzul,
you know I am afraid of nothing that lives, nothing that I can fight and tear to pieces. But that place...
He sighed deeply.
The Bleeding Hollow clan will go where Nerzul leads. Good. Between us, we will be more than a match for anything that waits within those walls. Now to gather our warriors and your Death Knights, he told his two lieutenants. We must reach the Bone Waste as soon as possible.
Kilrog nodded and walked away. Gorfing glared after him and saluted Ner'zhul and followed. His fellow Death Knights clustered around him before he had gone far. Ner'zhul turned away as well, his hands clutching the bag at his side and feeling the rough shapes of the artifacts it contained. Despite his strong words, he wondered what they would find in Arcadoon. Did the Draenei dead still linger there? Would they hold him responsible for their actions of his former pupil, or would they see that Gul'dan had betrayed Ner'zhul as well? Would the strange ruins prove a much-needed shelter from the Alliance army, or would taking his orcs there only expose him to even greater danger? He did not know, but he could not think what else to do, and so they would find out. Ner'zhul just hoped he was not making a grave error. The horror warriors came to a stop, staring. The trees ended just behind them, and before them stretched the gray soil and littered fragments of the bone wastes. Arcadoon rose in its midst, squat and ugly, the remains of its shattered dome jutting upward like broken teeth. The ruined temple nestled within it like a battered head, half buried in the dull ground. Ner'zhul stared as well. He couldn't help it. The last he had seen of this place, the Draenei's holy resting place, it had been ominous and intact. Now, with great gasping rents in the temple walls, the entire sections opened to the sky, with the forest that had cradled it blasted away and bone covering the ground. He could barely reconcile it with the dreadful majesty of the monument that had been so terrified him in the youth. The ground seemed to shake all around him, and at first Ner'zhul thought it was merely the rush of blood pounding through his veins, his heart racing from the sight of an ancient grave city. Then he realized the vibrations were coming from somewhere outside himself and glanced around. His orcs stood still, or quietly shuffling. Some looked around as if searching for the same thing he was. Then he looked behind them. Through the trees, he saw shapes flickering there.
The Alliance is right behind us!
He shouted, his voice carrying easily here where the trees did not impede it.
We must take shelter! To Arcadoon! Hurry! Move it, you worthless cretins!
Kilrog added, slamming his axe against a nearby tree so hard the entire trunk shuddered. The sound and the motion seemed to wake the warriors from their shocked trance, and they broke into a run, all heading for the Draenei building ruined dormway. Passing through the massive, lopsided portal, Ner'zhul felt a shiver of fear race through him. Were there still spirits guarding this massive tomb? As he felt there were when he had first approached it so long ago, or had they fled with the building's ruination? There was no time to ponder such things. He hastened deep into the demolished temple and down through the gaping hole into what remained of the labyrinth below. Kilrog and Gorfing beside him, and several of Kilrog's most trusted warriors before them. Underground, Arcadoon was more elaborate than without, its carvings more intricate. Some things, it seemed, had survived, at least to some degree. An elegant arch, now shattered, rose above the base of the stairs they had used, and above that Ner'zhul saw strangely graceful shapes. They seemed less faithful representative. Thick pillars had once supported high roof directly beneath the temple floor, and portions of them remained. The rough, unadorned surfaces, a strong contrast to the decorated walls around them. Niches had been carved into those walls, row upon row of them, and hint of white and yellow within told him what he would find there. Bones. No doubt all the walls contained such Draenei remains, and it was their contents that were now strewn across the bone wastes. The Draenei ancestors exposed to the elements where once they had rested in peaceful shade beneath the heavy stone. The floor here was stone as well. Small tiles indiscreetly worked into cunning pattern, and broad stairways connected different levels. Glancing down, Ner'zhul saw at least 6 floors below them. the centers ripped away by that fateful explosion, the remnants now exposed to open air. Then, the others pulled him into a wide tunnel that ran off to one side from the central space.
The walls here are still sound,
Kilrog was saying, glancing about and nodding in approval. Ner'zhul was pleased. Kilrog had worried him earlier with his almost crippling fear, but now he made up his mind. Kilrog was committed and calm.
A few collapses, but most of the ceiling remains, and the floor is still possible. We can group our warriors a bit further back, where they seem to be less damaged.
He gestured toward the tunnel's back end, which stretched into shadow. Ner'zhul saw that he was right. There was less rubble there, and the ceiling seemed unbroken.
We can set up a strong defense post here. The Alliance will have a hard time digging us out once we're set in. Some of the lower tunnels may still be intact,
Gorfin pointed out.
We should check those carefully before venturing forth. If nothing else is there, they might provide even better strongholds.
Kilrog nodded and detailed some of his warriors to search the rest of this tunnel, and several to search the tunnels nearby, though he warned them not to stray too far. The others he ordered to carry rubble to the tunnel's mouth and build a low wall across it as best they could. Then he, Gorfin, and Ner'zhul settled in to wait and discuss battle strategies. A few hours later, one of Kilrog's scouts returned. The warrior's eyes were wide, but a faint smile played across his lips.
There's something you need to see. What is it?
Ner'zhul asked, rising to his feet and dusting his hands against his thighs. He and Gorfin had been working on a contingency plan that might ultimately save them all, but it was not finished yet.
We found something, sir,
the warrior replied. The smile was broadening into a grin now, and that lifted Ner'zhul's spirits. Whatever it was they had found, clearly this scout did not consider a threat. Ner'zhul gestured for the orc to lead on and followed him out of the room as they claimed for their projects and down a long tunnel behind it. Other warriors were clustered there, and as Ner'zhul approached, they fell back.
By ancestors,
Ner'zhul whispered, the words falling from slack lips as he gaped open. Before him stood several figures. One was an ogre, the rest were orcs. Ner'zhul did not recognize them, though, and their attire and adornment were wholly strange to him.
Who are you?
He demanded, stopping only a few feet from the strangers.
And what are you doing here in Arkadoon?
One of the orcs stepped forward. He was short and stout, much as Gul'dan had been, and indeed Ner'zhul saw much of his former student in his strange features and posture. This new orc's domed head glistened in the torches and the warriors had placed along the hall, and his long fringed beard was black, sleek, and silver. Yet there was an aura of power around him as he stood there in strange rune-scribed black robes, an ornate staff in one hand.
Ner'zhul,
he said softly, his voice rough.
Is that you? Where is Gul'dan? Gul'dan is dead, the traitor,
Kilrog replied, snarling at the stranger and glowering down at him with his one eye.
He nearly saw the death of all of us for his own twisted abominations. Ner'zhul rules the Horde once more.
The stranger nodded, apparently not shocked by this news.
Then I submit to your leadership, Ner'zhul,
he replied, the words halting as if he had not spoken in some time.
I am Vorpil, once of the Shadow Council, though perhaps you do not recognize me.
Vorpil? Ner'zhul stared at the stranger, squinting in the dim light. Yes, it was Vorpil, whom he remembered as a promising young Thunderlord shaman. But that Vorpil had possessed a thick, dark braid of hair that reached down his back, and his beard was short and black as well. What had happened to him to age him so and give him such clear, mystical strength? Gorfin stepped forward now, for he had also been a part of Gul'dan's Shadow Council.
Vorpal,
he whispered.
you here, old friend?
Vorpal hissed and jumped back, as did the others. Fear flitted across their blunt features as he got a good look at the Death Knight.
Be easy,
Soothed Gorfane, lifting his hands in a calm gesture.
it's me, Gorfiend.
For a long moment, Vorpal stared at Gorfane, his eyes narrowing as he studied the Death Knight with more than mere sight. After a second, those eyes widened.
Gorfiend?
He asked.
Yes. It is. It feels like you, trapped within that rotting meat.
The orcs lowered their weapons and looked uneasily at each other, but trusted their leader. Vorpal stepped forward hesitantly.
What has happened to you? What dead thing do you drape around your spirit like a cloak?
I inhabit the body of a creature called a human.
Gorfine answered. At the blank looks he received, he added,
It is one of the races we encountered when we went to the other world. The one Gul'dan created a portal to.
Other world?
Ner'zhul was growing impatient.
When our world was dying, Gul'dan was able to open a portal onto another world known as Azeroth. It is there that we met these humans, and Gorfine's spirit inhabits one of their corpses. More we will tell you later, but right now we would hear your tale, for that may aid us in our current plight.
Plight? What plight? Asked the larger figure Ner'zhul had noticed earlier, stepping forward to join the conversation.
Are you in danger?
The creature was an ogre, as Ner'zhul had already realized, but not just any ogre. He saw that as the torchlights revealed a second head atop those massive shoulders. Two-headed ogres were rare, and two-headed ogre warlocks, as the dark energies emanated from this one told Ner'zhul were rarer still. Only two such had been part of Gul'dan's inner circle. He remembered Gul'dan's own right-hand Cho'Gall and
Blackheart!
Gorfine whispered, having obviously reached the same conclusion.
Is it really you?
The creature's two-head nodded.
It is,
One answered.
though not perhaps as you remember us.
The second added. That was certainly true. Ner'zhul had never had dealings with Blackheart directly. Gul'dan had recruited the ogre warlock personally after taking control of the horde. But he had seen the creature around more than once, a towering figure with long warrior braids and piercing black eyes. Those eyes were gone now. One head had a strange metal patch over its right eye, evidently welded in place, and the other eye bore a sorceress tattoo around it. The other head, which was covered in a closed cowl, had only a single eye above its nose. Twice the size of any normal natural orb, strange rune covered Blackheart's flesh, a single massive sigil across the chest, and two below, a band on each arm. The ogre wore a loose robe draped around both shoulders and then down across its belly, a belt holding the fabric over its loins. The thick bracers covered both wrists, and it held a massive spiked hammer in one oversized hand. Blackheart's sheer size and strength had always been imposing, but now he presented a truly savage figure.
I ask again, the ogre rumbled. What plight? The Alliance is right behind us, Kirog said. The humans we spoke of earlier and other races they work with. We are outnumbered and cannot stand against them, not without aid.
We cannot fall.
Gorfine added.
The fate of our people rests upon Ner'zhul reaching the Black Temple. He will perform a rite that will save us all.
He did not explain further, but both Blackheart and Vorpal nodded.
We have been sent here since Gul'dan sent us to Arkadoon to plunder it, Vorpal told him. Surviving within these tunnels and hoping that one day return to the Horde. Now the Horde has come to us. We know these ruins well, for they have been our home for years.
The others behind him nodded.
We will fight these humans alongside you and help you defeat them.
Oh, crush any who stand in our way! Blackheart agreed, raising his enormous hammer so the top spike brushed the hallway ceiling.
We will render them limb from limb,
the other head assured them.
Our ancestor has smiled upon us to restore you to us in this hour of need,
Ner'zhul said.
Know that you are welcome in the Horde once more and will share our people's triumph.
The warriors around them cheered, chanting, Ner'zhul, Ner'zhul, and Vorpal, and Blackheart, and the Horde, loud enough for the walls to tremble, and Ner'zhul smiled. He had been right to brave Arkadoon. With these newfound allies, he would surely make it to the Black Temple in time. Chapter 20. Dennis slammed his fist into the other palm.
We have them,
he shouted.
Now, all we have to do is go in and get them.
Yes, but not now, Yassadar replied, one of the Illyria's rangers. He had somehow assumed the role of Daneth's advisor during the pursuit of the Horde, and despite his aloof manner, Daneth liked him. More often than the elf was right, we need to wait until morning.
By the morning, they'll have dug in,
Daneth protested, glaring down at the slender, resident-haired ranger, and then across the bone-line shattered stretch of the land to where the colossal ruins sprouted.
If we attack now, we can take them before they've had a chance to settle and build up defense.
Look around you, Thassadar urged. You may be ready to fight, but your men are not. It is growing dark, and they are weary. Would you have them stumbling about underground, blind to danger, and too tired to defend themselves from the inevitable ambush? Daneth turned in an angry, anguished face to the elf.
They killed Cardrin!
The news had shaken the group of men who were already exhausted from the brutal pace. Daneth had set them, when the wild hammers had returned, making no effort to hide the tears in their eyes at the thought of their fallen, including their beloved leader. Daneth had been forced to turn away himself. He lost so many, and now the buffy, jovial dwarf too? How many would have to die before these damn green things were stopped? No, Thassadar said quickly. And you will not honor his spirit if you take men too exhausted to fight, to avenge him. They will simply join him in death. Daneth scowled, but he knew the elf was right. He'd pushed his men hard all the way from the Orcish citadel, trying to catch Ner'zhul's forces in time. It was ironic that now that they were too tired to do anything about it.
One night,
he said finally.
We'll camp one night, rest, and attack at first light.
A wise choice, Thaddeusar agreed. And as usual, Daneth could not tell if the ranger was being sarcastic or sincere. And as he always did, he decided to ignore the elf's tone and take his words at face value.
Have the men fall out and set up camp, Daneth instructed his lieutenant. We attack at dawn.
Then, trusting his subordinates to take charge, he dismounted and led his exhausted and thirsty horse down to the river to drink. He splashed water on his dusty, sweaty face and drank deeply himself, then headed back to virtually collapse in his tent. A few hours later, when Daneth awoke, he was surprised to see not only other tents, but also several tall posts outlining a large, rough square.
What the hell is all this?
He asked Hendrik, one of the sergeants.
We were only here one night.
Hendrik shrugged.
Some of the men mentioned this be a good place for a fort, he explained. They wanted to set posts to mark it out. I didn't see the harm to it, so I said yes. It went fast and the elves helped.
In light of the sacrifice of our dwarven friends, I thought it would be a good gesture, said Theasar, stepping from the shade of the nearby tree and gliding over them. We are, after all, an alliance. How better to symbolize that than the start of a stronghold together? Dennis stared at the elf. You're the one who was pointing out how tired the men were, and now instead of resting, they're cutting the palace posts. Tharazar smiled. It is but a few posts, and many hands make light work. See for yourself the results. Deneth looked where he indicated. Dwarf, human, and elf stood together talking quietly. They still looked tired, but there were smiles on their faces, and one of Daneth's men clapped the elf and dwarf on the shoulder as they spoke. Your men were right. Not only does it have strategic value, but it's also the only place we have seen thus far on this planet that was not red and lifeless. This forest, at least, is still very much alive. If we someday return to these woods and complete what has begun here today, we shall name it the Alderan Stronghold. It is fitting. The orcs destroyed much of Quel'Thalas, and so in return we will claim this in one green region left upon this forsaken world. And if not, those posts will stand as a reminder that the Alliance entered this forest and claimed it as their own. Tharazar's voice had more passion in this short speech than Daneth had ever heard from him before. Daneth took another look at his men and nodded. Let's get these orcs first, eh? He accepted the food Hendrik pressed upon him and found it quite a quiet place by one of the campfires to eat and then stretch out his legs. Crossed his arms over his chest, leaned back against the tree behind him, and again fell asleep. Dennis started to awake at the sound of yelling in Thalassian and a strange, eerie squawking sound. He leapt to his feet. What's going on? He didn't get a verbal answer in the chaos, running toward the source of the noise. Dennis saw what seemed to him like a dozen elves piled on top of something that was making an awful screeching sound. Step back, he ordered. The elves reluctantly rose, dusting themselves off, while two of their fellows kept a firm grip on one of the strangest things Daneth had ever seen. The intruder wore deep purple robes, now torn and stained with blood and grass. It was about the size of a man and had arms and legs, but resemblance stopped there. Jutting from the cowl was not a human face, but the head of a bird. It had a long, sharp face, most of it a glossy violet beak, and slanted oval eyes that glowed yellow in the night. A cluster of feathers rose above each eye, like a human brow, and these merged with a shock of red, purple, gold, and brown feathers all around the head to form the equivalent of hair. One bright eye was partly closed. The elves had not been gentle in their capture. What manner of creature are you, and what were you doing skulking around our camp? Thrasidar demanded. You're wasting your breath, Dennis said. You can't understand our language.
But Grezzik, yes, he does, and no harm he means.
The creature's voice was a strange trill, but clearly understandable. Dennis blinked at him. He is like a trained parrot. All sound, no meaning, one of the men murmured, and raising a fist to silence the birdman. No, wait, Dennis ordered. Say that again.
Grisrick! No harm he means. No! Only want to know who you be, why you come.
Daneth glanced at Thrasidar, who shrugged, stepped back, and let Daneth direct the inquisition. Your name is Grisrick. At the rapid nodding, Daneth continued. Answer our questions, and maybe we'll answer yours. What are you?
Grisrick is a Rokoka,
the birdman answered. His words oddly clipped clipped, and each followed with whistles and sighs. Old race. Oldest maybe in world. Grisrick, curious, no harm. So you keep saying. But why are you spying on us? How do you know our language? Aarakocra, clever, Grisrick said proudly. Smart. Grisrick, follow you. Listen close. Learn fast. Think you're strange. Yes. Are the Aarakocra friends of the Horde, or their enemies? That produced the greatest reaction yet. Grisrick's facial feathers puffed up like a frightened bird's, and he huddled in on himself. Fear and hate them, Grisrick. I do. Not bad once. I have seen, but now... He shivered. Dennis had seen enough of Grisrick by now to realize he was no physical threat, and nodded to the elves who still held the intruder. Give him water, and tend to his wounds, he told them. To Grisrick he said, Explain. Aarakocra ancient people. We stay to ourselves, but we watch peaceful Draugrheim primitive orcs. But who could know? Madness came to orcs. What we know not. Despite his heavy robe, he shivered, feathers shifting uneasy before he made a visible effort to continue. Orcs and Draugrheim not friends, but they not hate. Respect. Whoa, said Dennis, holding up a hand. Slow down. Orcs and Draugrheim? Draenei as in Draenor. Draenor is name they call world. Yes! They proud of selves. They name whole world for selves. They strong. Before. You said there was madness. The orcs turned on these Draenei? Grisrick nodded. Yes. Once many Draenei. They use bright light. Live here long time. They think themselves strong and good. No one stopped Draenei. No. But orcs? Grisrick made a whooshing sound and swept his arm before him. Gone. Only few left now. Now once proud Draenei hide away. Dennis felt a chill. The orcs wiped out a whole civilization. He glanced up at Thrazar. Sounds like the Horde did a practice run before they came to Azeroth. Indeed it does, except Azeroth did not fall to them as Draenor has. We are stronger. Luckier, maybe. He shook his head, his face hard. A whole civilization of peaceful people. What a damned shame. He returned his attention to the Aarakocra. Keep talking. You said the Draenei were peaceful, but also powerful, and that the orcs were primitive at first. How is it they were able to wipe out these Draenei? The orcs, Grisrick groped for words, come together. No longer separate. The orcs do have different clans, Thasdar said. It sounds as if they were not always unified. Directed horde. Wrong ears right, chirped Grisrick excitedly. At any other time, Dennis would have laughed at the offended look that crossed Thrasadar's face, at the insult. Orc ununited. They grew strong, cruel, skin turned from this, and he pointed to a brown feather. To this, he indicated a green one. The skin turned color, from brown to green, Dennis said, raising an eyebrow. Yes. Then Green Orc attack and slay Draenei. Aarakocra say that we are next. He pointed to the massive ruins just visible through the trees. Arkadun. Draenei dead sleep there. It is holy. Most. He patted the soil. Most is below ground. Most is below ground. Grisrick nodded. Why? Winding blue ground. Yes. All dead now. thought occurred to Daneth. Have you been there? To Arkadoon? To these winding tunnels? Rizik nodded enthusiastically. Do you know your way through? Daneth asked. Rizik nodded. I've been down there, down many times. But why you wish go there? I am Daneth Trollbane of the Alliance, Daneth responded. We have pursued the Orcish horde from our own world, and I intend to attack them on the morrow, and see them dead and their threat destroyed. They're hiding in those tunnels. I'm going to find them. We could use your help. Thalasadar looked disapprovingly at Daneth, while the human ignored the glare. Rizik seemed harmless enough, and he obviously hated the horde. If he could save them from getting lost in a maze in a city of the dead, Daneth would be all for it. Great. I know the way in. Way that even orcs who live there now do not know. He leaned forward. I know where they live, and which patches new orcs will pick. Daneth and Tharazar again exchanged a glance. That is incredibly useful information, Daneth said. After a moment. Wait. Ah! The orc got to his feet excitedly, staring at the griffins which roosted on the trees, claws digging into branches they had chosen, heads tucked under one wing. He turned towards them. Magnificent! Reaching out to stroke the nearest griffin along a shoulder. The beast shuddered slightly, but did not wake up. Daneth noticed that Grizik's hands were more like talons than anything else, but his touch across the griffin's feathers was gentle. Hey now, what are you doing? Exclaimed one of the wild hammers, hurrying towards Grizzik. Easy, Fergan, Daneth said before the dwarf tackled their potential new guide. They're called griffins. From our worlds, Daneth explained to Grizzik. Each griffin has a rider, a wild hammer dwarf like Fergan here. Grizzik had reached the last griffin in line, a magnificent beast that stood shivering as if cold, despite the fact that it was a warm night. She agrees, he said, stroking her shoulder and back. That's scary, Fergan said in a voice that was gruffer than usual. Gurdren's mount. Grizzik clacked his beak and cocked his head askew, peering at Daneth. Skyri's rider Kurdren was the leader of the Wildhammers, Daneth explained. He fell in battle today. Ah, prisoner, I see. Prisoner? Orcs bring captive with them to Arkadoon. Look like him. The birdman pointed at Fergan. Red fur on sheen, blue drawn on skin. Very loud. Very loud. Daneth felt a surge of excitement. Kurdren was alive. He turned to Thalazar. We need to rescue him. The dwarf knew the risk, the ranger replied coolly, and the mission must come before personal attachments. But Daneth shook his head. Kurdren is one of Tyrolian's most trusted lieutenants. The fact that he's even alive means the Horde realize he knows things about our forces that they'll find very valuable. If they can crack him, we need to get him out of there. Before that happens, and this Aarakocra can take us to him. Tharazar sighed. Grizzik, no doubt it is dangerous for you to help us. Why do you do so? It's a answer. You oppose Horde, Grizzik replied with decisive clack of his beak. I too hate Horde. What they have done to Aarakocra, to our world. Daneth looked from Grizzik to Tharazar. The ranger nodded. It was the best chance they had, and if Grizzik did try to betray them, he'd pay, and quickly. Let's do this, then. By the time Grizzik had stretched out a basic map of Arkadoon and the various tunnels and explained them in common that grew clearer and clearer almost by the moment, Daneth had abandoned the idea of taking a small force to rescue Kurdren. Instead, he had a far better plan. He now strode along a long dark tunnel, only the torch in his hand providing any light. Grizik was perhaps 10 feet in front of him, and Thresidar was between the two of them. Neither the Aarakocra nor the elf required additional light to make their way, and behind Daneth walked fully half the Alliance army. Tunnels are wide, thinned. Alliance people can go together, Grizik had assured him. And tall. Even Ogre only stoops. Draenei built them well. Explosion that destroyed central passages did not reach other tunnels. Still clean and dry secure. That convinced Daneth, especially once Relayan had gone with Grizik to report back on the tunnel the Birdman had showed him. It's like the long hall in a palace, the Rangers had said. Exactly as he told us, and I saw no other movement, not even vermin. We'll divide into two, Dennis had decided. Half our forces will follow me through the tunnels and up into our dune. The other half will attack the front, sneaking in through the temple ruins and down to distract the horde while we approach from behind. Once we're in position, we'll strike and crush them between us. Now, less than an hour after entering the tunnel, Grizik was stopping and gesturing toward a wide door set into a wall. Behind this stairs, the Aarakocra explained. Lead us down to Akadum proper. Dennis scowled, remembering the maze the Aarakocra had sketched out for him. And you don't know exactly where the horde will be or where they've taken their prisoner, he asked again. Unfortunately, the Birdman's answer was the same as before. I know ways into Arkadun, he said again, but little beyond that. For a second, the shadows of his cowl gave him a long, sharp-planed face, a sinister casque. My people were not truly welcomed here. Draenei revere their dead, not appreciate intrusion. I wonder I explore here, learn a little, only a little though. Dennis nodded. He knew it was too much to hope that the Aarakocra could lead him straight to Kurdrin, but still, he didn't relish the idea of wandering aimlessly through miles of tunnel while the horde warriors crouched in ambush. Grizik reached for the door and jumped back, beak clacking in surprise, talon hands rising even as he crouched, as the door shifted and creaked open. Daneth raised his shield and lifted his sword as well, and stopped, staring at the figures outlined in the now opened